Bună dimineața și bun găsit la BU. Sunt Sabina Iosub și vă mulțumesc că sunteți alături de mine și astăzi pe Antena 3. În următoarea jumătate de oră vom avea o discuție extrem de interesantă și de plăcută cu un invitat cu totul și cu totul special. Today here with me is Lord Francis Maude. Thank you so much for your presence.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you also for being in Romania for the first time.
Well, it's exciting to be here. I've wanted to come to Bucharest for a long time, never found the opportunity. So the chance to come here, speak at this conference, meet with Romanian friends and others is a great opportunity.
There were interesting talkings during the conference, focusing on digital mainly. Your speech was welcomed here in Romania.
Well, the people were very kind. I led this big digital transformation program in the UK between 2010 and 2015, where we created the government digital service, a single government web domain, gov.uk. We closed down 1,500 different government websites, so there was one place for people to go. And we saved a huge amount of money through this efficiency and reform program and made digital services for the citizen. Took them really to a new level, and so we were very pleased that in 2016 the UN ranked Britain #1 in the world for e-government, which was a very long distance from where we'd been 5 years before, when we were notorious for very expensive IT, which wasn't doing very well.
A very good example that is also applied in some other countries afterwards.
Yes, I think other countries picked up what we had done and thought it was the right way to do it, because governments are typically organized in a way that's not very functional.
Bureaucracy is huge in general, yeah.
Big bureaucracies, but very much divided into individual silos, so individual ministries, and we tend to look at the functions which are cross-cutting, like digital and IT, procurement and commercial, property, major projects, financial management, and our approach was to say, well, these are better if they're much more joined up at the center of government and led from the center of government, and that's what we did, creating the government digital service, and that was replicated by President Obama in the United States. The Canadian government have created something similar, so have Australia, and a number of other governments around the world.
Maybe Romania would take your example. Is it possible, in your opinion?
It's totally possible. I think there's some very good work here. Bucharest is a big center for digital and tech companies, and government can support that. I mean, when I started in 2010, nearly 90% of what the government spent on IT was spent with 7 suppliers, all big multinational suppliers, and it was very hard for British companies, particularly smaller and newer British companies, to bid for and win that business. We opened that up. We reformed the way we did procurement and made it possible for smaller and newer businesses to bid for and succeed. And of course that created certainly supported Britain becoming a really vibrant center for tech businesses.
Let's explain a little bit. You were Minister of Trade, also Minister for Corporate Affairs, Minister for Europe and Financial Secretary to the Treasury. You've worked with Margaret Thatcher, with David Cameron, with a lot of prime ministers in the United Kingdom. How was this experience after being, I don't know, for about 27 years, I guess, member of the Parliament?
Well, it was great. I was very lucky to be given the opportunities I was given. I mean, in the 1980s, I was given by Margaret Thatcher 3 of the best ministerial jobs there were outside the cabinet. I was in my 30s. I mean, when I started in government, I was in my early 30s. And so to have the opportunity as quite a young man to have those quite big responsibilities and the opportunity to make a difference on the big stage was fantastic. So I was very, very lucky.
How was working with her?
She was terrific. I mean, she could be difficult. She was very forceful, strong. She would test people early on. I remember a meeting with her when I was a very new young minister, where she was quite rough with me in a meeting. And at that time this would have been, I don't know, 1987, 1988, when she was really at the peak of her powers and certainly the most powerful woman in the world. And being kind of verbally assaulted was quite intimidating for someone. I was 32, 33 at the time. But I remember thinking, she's testing you, and the only thing you do is get stuck in and argue your point, stand up for the point you're making, which I did, and therefore I think I passed the test.
Comparing that period with this one that UK is passing now, what are your thoughts?
It's, I was neutral on Brexit. I didn't take part either way. I've been hugely involved in European matters. I'd been Minister for Europe. I negotiated a lot of the single market directives and regulations when I was Minister for Corporate Affairs. I was very involved in the Maastricht Treaty. I've been chairman of the Conservative Party. I've been shadow foreign secretary, so I've been dealing with European matters really pretty much throughout my career. And I thought the arguments for Britain staying in or leaving were fairly evenly balanced. I thought if we voted to leave, there would be some certain short-term downside economically because of the uncertainty, and that uncertainty is clearly not over yet. But I thought there was potential upside opportunity because I think being in the European Union puts a ceiling over what a government can do to make a country a better place to do business, a better environment for investment and business. But I think it also puts a floor under what a government can do to make it worse. So there's a kind of narrower gap between success and failure. Take away membership of the European Union and it opens up. There's more scope to make it better, but more scope to make it worse. And I think there's more economic potential, but more risk as well. And I thought, I think it's been not very well handled, to say the least.
I observed that you were using past tense, so your thoughts have changed during these 3 years, I guess.
Not really, no. I think I still think. I mean, I think if we leave without a deal, that would be very bad on both sides. I think for the Eurozone, at a time when the economy is, Germany, I'm seeing in the newspapers today, is heading towards recession potentially. And the Eurozone is quite fragile economically, and so for there to be an exit which happens with one of the largest, the second largest economy in the European Union leaving without a deal, that will damage the whole Eurozone and the whole of the EU, as well as Britain, plainly. So it's plainly a bad outcome. But my own view is, as a Democrat, Parliament asked the people to make a decision, and we said in Parliament we will implement the decision that you reach, and so we have to do that. If Parliament can't agree on a deal, then I think the only alternative is to leave without a deal, and I would regret that, but I think we have to honour the decision that the people made in a referendum.
You're excluding actually a second referendum right now?
I don't think it would help. I think either outcome is a bit pointless. I think if you had a second referendum and it reached a different result, then the issue hasn't been resolved.
Yeah.
Because,
on which referendum should we look on? Yeah.
I mean, are you going to have best of three, or how are you going to do it? Mm-hmm. And if there was still another vote to leave, then you've still got the same questions unresolved. What are the terms on which we're going to leave? So I don't see it's going to help, really. And I think what we need to do is, I very much regretted that Parliament didn't vote for the deal that Theresa May negotiated.
Was it a good one in your opinion?
Well, I mean, it wasn't perfect, but the truth is there's only one way of staying in, but there's an infinite number of ways of leaving. And what was happening was everyone was saying, well, I don't like that one, what I want is something here. But unless you can get others to agree with that, it's not going to work. So at the end of the day, you have to trust the government to have reached the best agreement that they can and support it. It's not going to be there for all time. It's not an infinity. But you have to do it.
What do you think is actually happening in the parliament that they cannot reach an agreement? They've tried and tried. They've discussed with Theresa May, with Boris Johnson, kind of talked as it is possible in this period. But what is actually happening that they cannot reach a deal?
I think it is what I say, that everyone wants something different. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you know, you go to a restaurant, you look at what's on the menu and you say, well, I want that, but I don't want it quite like that. I want it a bit different. I want the mayonnaise on the side. I don't want it with salad. I want it with French fries.
Okay, but in the end, when you're going with a group, you're saying, okay, let's try to have all fish tonight, or something like this.
Yeah, I think you just have to. At the end of it, you try and influence the way the negotiation goes, and at the end of it, the ridiculous part of it is that the people who have voted against the Theresa May deal are some of the people who have wanted Brexit to happen most, and the result of them voting against it is to make it less likely that it happens. I still think it's very likely that Brexit will happen, but it's less likely than it was, for sure, because it's been delayed for so long.
The European Union is somehow tired right now.
Yeah.
They are negotiating with the United Kingdom for about three years.
Yeah.
They've tried, I don't know, almost everything. What do you consider should be or will be the reaction of the European Union in the end? Saying something like, okay, we are done, we are enough, we have enough talks, let's put an end to it?
I would completely understand that. I would have a lot of sympathy with that. I think in Britain there's a tendency to think that the only thing on the EU's agenda is Brexit. Of course it isn't. There are still massively unresolved issues around migration, which was obviously some of the issues which contributed to the Brexit vote in the first place, but also massive economic issues around the Eurozone and the indebtedness in some important member states. And those are still not yet resolved. And those are existential for the European Union. And so I would be completely sympathetic if the EU were to say, well, I'm sorry, we're not going to extend this. You either agree we'll agree what we can by October the 31st, but we're not going to extend it beyond that. I think they would be wholly justified in doing that. And I think it's a big mistake for there being such pressure on the Prime Minister to against leaving without a deal. I don't want us to leave without a deal, but I think when it's still a real prospect, that's what makes reaching a deal and agreeing a deal more likely.
You've negotiated a lot of things in the European Union structure. You've mentioned some directives, Maastricht also. Let's try to look a little bit at some important issues in discussion when talking about Brexit. Trade, free movement of persons, because, you know, Boris Johnson said that the free movement is not on the list starting the next day after Brexit. Free movement of goods also, it's under question. Where do you think it will be the biggest impact?
Well, we'll have to see what the terms are. I mean, we just don't know.
Yeah.
I would have been completely comfortable with us remaining in the European Economic Area, as Norway is and one or two other countries. I was involved in negotiating the EEA direct arrangements, whatever it was, 30 years ago. And, you know, we are a member of the EEA. We would have been entitled to remain in it. And that would have been a very good place to be, I think. It would have meant, you know, we're out of the European Union, so we've given effect to the referendum, but we have given business a clear line of sight for the trading arrangements, because we're still in the single market. that obviously would have included still being subject to free movement of people. But we would not have been in the customs union. We would have been free to negotiate our own trade agreements, and that would have been a very good place to start, I think. But that opportunity was missed by Theresa May, which I regret. And it wouldn't necessarily have been easy to do politically, but it was probably doable if it was done quickly enough. So what are the implications going to be? Well, we just don't know. I mean, if Britain leaves without a deal, nobody, I think, believes that we're going to be without a deal forever. Because that just doesn't make any sense.
It's impossible. Yeah. It's like you're isolating yourself from the world, actually.
Well, but also, it means the European economies isolating themselves from the UK, which happens to contain, in fact, the world's leading international financial centre and the deepest pool of capital in Europe. And so kind of saying we don't want anything to do with that is a big call to make.
This uncertainty, very deep, very profound uncertainty, affects mostly the citizens. How can we explain to the British citizens, to the European citizens, that actually their lives will be the same?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think most people aren't sitting around worrying about what's the relationship going to be, because they assume that they're going to be able to travel around Europe in pretty much the same way, and I would expect that to be the case. I would expect...
for the students to study in the United Kingdom?
Well, it remains the case. The only European universities in the top 10 in the world are British universities. Exactly. Are those universities going to want to continue to have access to the brightest students from around the European Union? Of course they are. And so I would expect that to continue. I think there will continue to be a lot of a huge amount of interaction. I think the people who are most worried about it is that group of businesses who do a lot of business with Europe, particularly manufacturing, who just don't know how the new arrangements are going to affect the deeply intermingled supply chains, particularly in the world of automotive and aerospace, where these supply chains are very intertwined now.
I was thinking also about Romanians who are working in the United Kingdom. Yep. There are a lot of doctors, for example, are working in your country. What should they know about their future, about the next years?
What should they know? Well, I mean, what the government has absolutely said is that people resident and working in the UK at the moment will continue to have that right. There's no question about that. And I mean, we should have said that earlier because it was clearly in our interest. But there was a desire to make that dependent on there being a reciprocal arrangement for British UK citizens living and working in the rest of the EU. But kind of that's all sorted anyway. So I would, for me, I deeply want Britain to be somewhere that remains open and welcoming. This should never be about Britain closing in on itself. This should be about us becoming more open, more internationalist, more outward-looking, and more welcoming. Our economy depends, and our society depends on being a place where people want to work, build businesses, do scientific and other research in universities. These are our strengths, and we succeed when we are most open to all of that. And if this was to tend towards us becoming more closed and more inward-looking, that would be a terrible, terrible pity and cause real damage I think I'm relaxed about immigration. I think we're a country which has grown through immigration over the centuries.
It's your first time in Romania. What do you know about our country?
I know that Bucharest is an amazing city and a very strong, vibrant economy, a huge amount going on here, and a real kind of magnet for talent and business, and particularly tech business. It's a very strong tech centre here. So I'm very strongly aware of that. I mean, and I think Romania has had many successes since its liberation from communist rule back in 30 years ago.
Yeah,
exactly,
1999.
just coming up to 30 years ago. And I remember it vividly. I was Minister for Europe at the time it happened, and so I saw at close quarters what was happening with the liberation of Central and Eastern Europe and the excitement that was generated. I was actually in Germany the night the Berlin Wall came down.
Well, what a moment.
And it was a great moment. The emotion, the excitement, the adrenaline was fantastic. And the sense that we were witnessing a moment in history where these great European cities and these great European nations were once again going to be able to take their place as fully as part of the European family of nations, which had some of its embodiment through the European Union, but was not at all limited to that. You know, Britain, UK will continue to be part of the European family of nations. It will just be outside the European Union. There are other countries which are European nations which are not in the European Union. And that's fine too. That we should be much more relaxed about different ways of belonging to the family.
Lord Francis Maude, it was an honor and a pleasure to discuss with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Iar vouă celor de acasă, vă mulțumesc pentru prezență. Nu uitați că ne revedem și sâmbătă viitoare la BU. Cu bine!
Imunitatea este capacitatea organismului de a lupta și a se proteja de virusuri, bacterii și toxine. Felul în care sistemul imunitar luptă cu virusurile diferă de la persoană la persoană. Tu știi cum stai cu imunitatea? Vino la Catena!